Every choice, every review, all has led to this. Let's talk about Mission Impossible: Final Reckoning.
Hello everyone, welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we're going to be discussing Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. Movie recommendation time. So, Mandem, what's the best recent thing that you've seen?
So I watched a TV series called Presumed Innocent on, and you can watch it on Apple TV. Basically, it's about this district attorney or like prosecutor that works with the district attorney or whatever. I don't know the legal whatever in America, but basically he's like a prosecutor. He is entangled in a relationship with one of his colleagues, who ends up being murdered, and he is essentially on trial for that murder. And it just kind of follows the fallout of all of that, the implications on his family, his kids, and of course he's being tried by his colleagues, and it's just his attempt essentially at trying to prove that he's innocent when a lot of like the facts and the evidence sort of kind of generally points towards his direction, points towards his involvement. And I thought it was brilliant. I wouldn't say brilliant. I thought it was like really good. I thought it was very good. I thought the way it handled the emotions in a relationship between a woman that had their partner cheat on them and, trying to keep the family together and what that looks like and how you deal with that level of betrayal in the family. I thought all of that was like really well done. I thought the courtroom side of things, like the whole courtroom procedure side of things, I generally tend to enjoy that type of stuff, and I thought it was like really well done. And I like that it took its time with it as well, and it kind of followed it over a number of episodes, kind of like introducing some of the different points and the way that it was kind of like giving wins to both sides. But I thought it was really good, and I kind of like binged it in. It's only 8 episodes, and I binged it over 2 days just because I was like so engrossed in what was going on, how it was unfolding, and like kind of like some of the revelations and shocks and stuff like that. I thought it was pretty good. So that's my recommendation.
For me, I would recommend Mobland. I don't think there's much to say on this besides that it might be one of, or probably the best UK gangster crime mob series I've seen. Even though there's only season 1, I really like Top Boy, but this one is between 2 mob families pretty much going to war, and then it just gets like hectic. And then Tom Hardy plays like the guy that works for one family, that he's pretty much the muscle behind the family and gets them out and does like all the gangster stuff. Even though obviously like the father of the family is like the head honcho, Tom Hardy, he's just the guy. He's like the assassin. He's like the good guy that makes things happen. He's just a protector. Tom Hardy's performance in this and just his character in this is just amazing. Of course, they've got a lot of stars in this film, but I think Tom Hardy, like, the guy's an amazing actor. And just the way that he plays his role is just, I think the story, you just get invested.
Yeah, I saw the first couple of episodes of that, and then my subscription lapsed. But yeah, it's a pretty hard-boiled crime drama. I thought really well done, and I've heard good things about the later episodes in season 1. So I'm definitely going to go back to that. So for my pick this week, I like to complain about a couple of different things. One of them is that if a show deals with heavy topics, they take it as an excuse to no longer actually craft a good story with good characters. Another one is that there are very few shows where you can just watch an episode and have a good time with it and then move on with your life. Like, not everything has to be an 8-hour movie. And also, in the streaming age, it's possible for a show to be good and be well received and be celebrated and run for several seasons, and you've never heard of it. So guess what I found this week? What I watched this week is a sitcom called Mom, which is about this recovering alcoholic who moves back with her recovering alcoholic mother. And her 17-year-old daughter is pregnant and is on track to also become an alcoholic. And these 3 basically kind of try to get their life together, and that is the setup for a whole bunch of different sitcom plots. And over the course of the 8 seasons, kind of there's like a group of this Alcoholics Anonymous group, and they have different stories and they have different struggles with addiction, but they never forget to make it fun, and they never forget to make the characters likable. And it deals with all sorts of heavy topics, and alcoholism is just the beginning, but they treat all of them, I thought in really nuanced and intelligent ways, but they never lose sight of the jokes, and they never lose sight of character. and they keep that more or less going for 8 seasons. It drops off in quality a little bit towards the last couple of seasons, but overall it's just a really solid sitcom that still is a good story and still is well told and is still really engaging. And so I recommend that.
Where is it on?
So it's on Amazon Prime in the UK.
Okay.
It was like a CBS sitcom that ran for like 2013 to 2021.
Well, looks like it's time for the main event. Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Daniel, please, can you give the people a synopsis of what we're about to discuss or debate?
So Mission Impossible Final Reckoning is the latest Mission Impossible movie that follows Ethan Hunt and his team as they fight the entity, which is an AI that is about to take over the world, and they basically have to go rogue to save the world. It is the continuation of Dead Reckoning from 2023. I think it is the conclusion of the Mission Impossible series, right? At least with Ethan Hunt. So what did we think of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning?
I don't have an issue with this film. That's kind of weird to start, but I think the best way to describe the film is a film filled with moments. In terms of the story as a whole, it's kind of hard to judge it as a whole because it is part of a whole franchise. I don't know how many movies that they've done, but I'm pretty sure they've done quite a lot. So I feel like my outtake on the film would be different to someone that's watched every Mission Impossible film. However, the way that it was marketed felt like this was the end of that saga, but it didn't feel like that. It should have felt like a culmination of Ethan Hunt's journey, but it didn't. It felt like it was just another chapter in a longer saga. So I was like, okay. So even though it was kind of like marketed as if this was going to be the end, it didn't really feel like an end. It just felt like it felt like there's going to be another film, if you want me to. And that's kind of like where my disappointment lies. I did want it to feel like this was the end, if you ask me. Even though I haven't seen all the movies, I've seen some of them, but I haven't seen all of them. So I did want to feel like this was the end. However, it didn't feel like that. So that's why I think the story for me wasn't as engaging. However, like I said, it was a film filled with moments, and some of the moments did kind of leave me gobsmacked in terms of like the story itself. The story itself is cool, but it's a spy movie, and I don't think I've seen a spy movie that I've been immersed by. For the moment, I'll say that the movie was cool. I had a good time ish.
It's a mixed bag because I really want to say it's a good time at the movies, but it's just too long. Like it's a good half an hour, maybe 40 minutes too long in this. Definitely the two kind of main set pieces in this is to be made to be seen in the cinema, and they're both really amazing and really intense. And in parts, I don't mind the way that they kind of like slowly build towards these set pieces, but in other parts, yeah, because it's like we're not really telling a proper story here, and there's like so many pieces missing, and there's so many problems with all the elements of the story. I mean, the first opening act, it felt like we were like kind of like speed running certain things. We just kept like jumping from like scene to scene, place to place, and it just felt like everything was happening way too fast. And I was getting a bit of whiplash as to where everything was. And then they completely like slow it down as they build up to sort of the underwater submarine stuff. And it was just like, just all over the place. I don't know whether they're trying to build some of these side characters to kind of continue the Mission Impossible franchise with maybe like new lead, new protagonist, new team, etc. But if they are, they did a very bad job of sort of selling us on these new characters because, what are they really about? Why should I care? Like, they didn't really do anything that was, super interesting for me anyways. So I really hope that this isn't the new cast outside of sort of Tom Cruise, of course. I really hope this isn't the new cast that, they're going to try and go for, because I don't feel like they need to end it here, even though it was like quite touching, kind of like seeing some of the opening moments in this film, especially like when they were calling back to where the franchise started and where it is now. I always, love seeing that in movies. I always love seeing kind of how we got here from, its humble beginnings in Mission Impossible 1, and any franchise for that matter. It has like a nice callback at the start of the movie, and it has that kind of like nice feeling at the start of it being a resolution or conclusion to his arc and his sort of story in the Mission Impossible franchise. But by the end of it, you're kind of really questioning, is it really the end, or like, what are we actually doing? So where's it trying to go? And I will agree, it kind of felt a little bit cheap and disappointing that we didn't get a finale in this, as it was kind of like billed as being a finale, and the building is billed as being sort of a conclusion to the franchise. So I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it. I feel like, for what it wanted to be. And again, I feel like Mission Impossible's kind of become all about the stunts and we're kind of like building and crafting towards the stunts. I feel on that side of things, I felt it executed really well on the two sort of main set pieces on this. Everything outside of it is a bit whatever, and there was like so many points where I was just kind of like, all right, can we get along with it? Can we kind of like move it on so we can just actually just get to what we're really here for, pretty much. So kind of mixed bag for me.
So I've got the Wikipedia page open for the movie, and in the plot section it says this may be too long or excessively detailed, and I think that's about right. It is way too long. It is almost 3 hours. I think the first part of it is completely redundant. You can just watch this part. I think there's much in in Dead Reckoning that you need to know, because the stuff you do need to know, they recap here, but they do it quicker and clearer than they did in the first movie. Just having seen Dead Reckoning just 2 weeks ago, this was actually a pretty good experience, because there's like people talk like human. Like my complaints about Dead Reckoning was the exposition is overly clunky, it's overly long, it is delivered by robots. This doesn't have that problem. There's a little bit of that, but for the most part, these people talk like real people, and basically the entire movie is kind of establishing the stakes and justifying the big stunts, and then we're doing the big stunts, and at the end the heroes win. And that's kind of what this promises, and that's what this delivers. Because I disliked Dead Reckoning so much for being like so bloated and robotic and all of that, I actually kind of like this. Like there are definite flaws in this, and I think you could cut out entire sections and you would not hurt the story, which I don't think is something a movie should be proud of. But considering that, I had a borderline good time with it. Let's talk about it.
Going into this movie, did you guys have a question that you feel like was answered? A question which you ended up having after seeing Dead Reckoning?
I don't think I was like really like, that invested in the story in Dead Reckoning anyways to have many questions or sort of have anything that I needed concluded in this movie. I think for me, the continuation of the villain, maybe that I kind of maybe wanted to see a little bit more of him, a little bit more sort of kind of development in him, but he was pretty anonymous for most of the movie. To be honest, he kind of wasn't really there, and when he was there, he was generic bad guy. So that was a little bit disappointing, because I don't feel like there was sort of he was a great antagonist. The entity, it was just like kind of implied the effect of the entity, and it was implied sort of how the entity had like manipulated media into a point where we was at this like kind of like point where there's like riots and it's like we're at that essentially the brink of war. You never really kind of like got that and felt that. And I don't think it's like too much of a criticism, because I don't think the movie is trying to do that. I feel like the movie is all about building towards these stunts, which I'm actually on board for. But I just felt like there was a lot in between. There was a lot of like in between to kind of get to where we needed to go. And I feel like that's where it was just like losing me a little bit, where it was just like, okay, we can just like cut some of it out. So no, I don't think I had any questions that really needed to be answered, but it's just like on the villain aspect of it, on the antagonist aspect of it, I feel like it just kind of didn't really fully develop how I probably imagined it would have.
But I think that's one of the first parts where the story really falls flat, which is we see like a scene where there's people protesting, but we don't really see the impact of the AI having taken over everything, right? Like it's apparently infiltrated cyberspace so completely that it can just create realities, and people have no idea what's true and what isn't. And it's like that's like a metaphor that kind of works on two levels at least. The first one is fake news, deepfakes, propaganda, like all like. I wandered into Twitter a few weeks ago for the first time in like 10 years. It's like a culture shock about how unhinged everything is and how divorced from reality so much of it is. And if you are just inundated with that, you have just a completely different perception of what the world is like. That's kind of what the AI is doing, apparently, right? Like they have like this montage where they show how they just it just creates conflicts and atrocities that didn't happen. But people are scared by it and outraged by it, and they're on the streets, and that is kind of causing society to fall apart. Would be nice if we saw that, like not just in an exposition scene, but actually in characters. Like show us characters who actually are afraid. Show us characters who are refusing orders because they believe there are riots in their hometown and they want to get back to their family, but there's no riots going on, right? just as one example off the top of my head, embed that into the story and embed that into the characters and make that one of the obstacles for the heroes to overcome. Like if that is your story, then you should actually do that. And it drives me crazy when movies just assert that a thing is happening, but they never show it. It's like writers today have forgotten show don't tell. Like don't just tell us that this is happening, actually show us characters doing stuff because that is the reality they live in.
Even further to that point was the whole notion of they couldn't destroy the entity because there was like a risk of like escalation or something like that, or like the risk of like the fallout of like destroying the entity on, I can't remember what it was like the government or like, create conflict or whatever. But it just never made sense to the point of like you've got this entity that's like supposedly wreaking havoc online and, creating all these like false realities. It's like, shouldn't, I know as a government organization and, they're meant to be like shady and want to have all control, that they'd want to control it. But when you can't control it and the only option is to destroy it, why would everyone be so against destroying it if the only other option is the entity wins and sets off sort of a nuclear war? It just kind of like didn't really make sense, that part. It was just kind of, it seemed like it was just there for a reason for Ethan Hunt to go rogue and go against the government and sort of to kind of not be on board. When actually it might have been a little bit more interesting to kind of see him. Well, he was kind of working with them to essentially because he had sort of the president's sort of permission. But it would have maybe been good to maybe for his final time out not to go rogue and actually be the agent he's actually meant to be. So
the stakes were that in order to stop the entity, you have to shut down the internet and never turn it on again. And if you do that, then we are in a deep collapse. Like the famine and just breakdown of everything will be. It's not just Netflix going down; it's everything going down, right?
Yeah.
And
but was that what he was proposing? Was that what he was proposing?
They were basically saying like we can turn off the entity, but if we do, we turn off the internet. In a networked world, that basically means switching off society, like civilization. And so we can do it, and it's better than nuclear war. But it's like we really want a third option.
And at that point, sorry, when they were discussing it, there was the third option in terms of the virus that Luther had created to kind of kill the entity and trap it. So it's just be like, why didn't you just say that there was a third option? Why didn't you say
the third option is Ethan Hunt succeeding?
Yeah.
Right? Like that is what everybody hopes for, because then society can continue to exist. Plans A and B are both like the end of modern society.
When they like arguing against sending him on the mission, like they were actively arguing against him because it wasn't the right thing to do, or like, they didn't believe in what he was doing. If that is the third option and him succeeding and that kind of like works out, it's like, why not just go for it? I don't know. I was just completely confused by that.
Well, there's a fourth option, which is nuke everybody else before they nuke you.
Okay.
Right? So where there was like this countdown where there's 8 nuclear nations, and the AI is gradually taking control of their nuclear arsenals one by one. And the game theory of it is essentially, if you wait too long, the AI takes over all nuclear arsenals and then it can destroy the world. If you launch your nukes, like everybody is incentivized to launch their nukes against the other arsenals first before they are compromised. And that is what some of the people in the US government are advocating for. And that is what we assume is happening in all the other governments as well, is that nuke everybody else before they fall to the AI. But that means you are the one who destroys, like who starts World War III, right? So that's the dilemma. And I thought that worked decently well. Like it's like I would have liked to have, have it be fleshed out a little bit. And especially the part where the AI controls all of that, like actually be shown in the movie. But just in terms of the logic of it, I thought that worked.
So at the end of it all, do you guys feel like the AI was a formidable foe?
It never does anything really, right? It's basically a MacGuffin. It exists in cyberspace and it's invisible, and then it exists in this one drive where they trap it, and that's kind of it. It never does anything. Like it does commune with Ethan at one point, and that was a fine sequence, but it's very much not an active agent in the story.
And I felt like they did it better in Dead Reckoning in terms of it being a threat. So like when he's sort of kind of chasing down the bad guy, when he says like one person you care about is going to die, and then the AI is actively sort of kind of like messing up their communications and stuff like that. I felt like there was just like more scenes like that in the first movie, and like when they were in sort of like the dance club, and it's essentially like a party put on by the AI, and it's just kind of like everywhere, and you can like kind of feel its presence a little bit more. It was done better in Dead Reckoning, and again here, it's like apart from that scene where he sort of speaks to it, I don't know, you can't, you just don't really feel its presence at any point in the movie.
And I kind of adding on to that, I feel like that's where the film fell short, because part one pretty much left us with the entity being like, the primary antagonist. So I felt like that was a setup for part two to let us know, okay, this is a build up to the AI's power and what we're gonna see in the final reckoning. But we didn't see that at all. Like we didn't see like its influence. Like we saw the impact that it had on others, as in like human, like human reactions to obviously to the AI. And I feel like that's what they were mainly trying to do, was kind of like to convey human nature to having power, or just a reaction to having that power, that kind of power, or the possibilities of having that power, and see how others would react to it, and others as well. However, it was like that's not really what was kind of like. I don't feel like that's what was conveyed to us in part one. I feel like part one was just a build up to obviously what we're going to see in part two. But it's hard to speak on this because there's doesn't feel like there's much to speak on it when it comes to the story itself. Because I think like the main thing about this films is the action. Do you know what I'm saying? Is like the action and the stunts and all of that. Do you feel like we're giving this film grace? Because if this was any other film, right, like take away Tom Cruise and just take away the legacy and the franchise and what it's done for, I don't know what it's done for cinema. If we would take this story and put it in a different setting, right, different actors and stuff, I'm pretty sure others would crucify this film. Do you guys agree? Or
I disagree on that. And I feel it's similar to the Final Destination situation where it knows what it wants to be and it executes it really well. So this, like, just like Final Destination's about, such and such happened, these people cheat death, and then death is sort of pretty much coming back to get them, and they do it in like the most creative and most gruesome ways. And, the one that we just watched, like it had a lot of like really good sort of set pieces for sort of how people were sort of going to be killed, and they executed that really well. I feel like the whole sell on this movie is Tom Cruise doing absolutely ridiculous stunts and just doing death-defying stunts, and then you had the submarine scene, and you had like the airplane stuff that was sort of towards the end of the movie, and I felt like those two, because they're like done to such a high level, is that you can kind of like excuse that it's not as focused on its story and it's not as focused on its character development and taking its character on a journey, because for me anyways, it's not trying to do that. And again, it's all about giving something that's serviceable enough. If your main focus isn't going to be the story, it's just give us something that's serviceable enough. And for me in this, it's a little bit less so serviceable than what we got in Dead Reckoning, and I feel like it just kind of like dragged in certain places, but it did an okay enough job for me to kind of give it a little bit more grace and be like, I had a good time at the cinema because I saw some stuff that made me feel a certain type of way. Like the whole submarine scene, I felt claustrophobic the entire time he was underwater, and it made me feel something in the cinema, which is why I give it its pass. Whereas like, other things that we've criticized in the past, so something like, Argyle, for example, the story isn't that great, the movie isn't that great, and then you're not really giving us anything innovative or anything sort of unique. You're not giving us like anything like sort of super interesting on the action set pieces and stuff like that. That's where we give it a little bit more harsh criticism. It's like, okay, well, what are we actually like doing here? Where are we trying to go? Or if it's like a legacy franchise that's kind of just chucked out a new movie for the sake of chucking out a new movie without really like recapturing the essence of what made the franchise great. And I feel like this is what the movie does well, actually, is it captures what Mission Impossible is and what Mission Impossible should be about. And it always has like things that are iconic with it. So like, whether it's Ethan Hunt just like running down a long path and we're just doing like a long take of him just running because it's now sort of commonplace. I actually don't know whether we got the whole face swap thing in here in this. Yeah, we did. Did we get it? I think we got it briefly. And then the big promise is we're going to do bigger and better stunts than we did in the last movie. And I feel like it always delivers on what Mission Impossible really should be. So it just knows its identity and it executes it well.
Yeah, I think you just need to be clear about what a movie is and wants to be, and then judge it on whether or not it does that and whether you like that, right? So here, yeah, it is all of those things that you kind of described. The characters are not all that interesting, right? Most of them at least. But that's okay in a story in which we basically just want to go from one big set piece to the next, and we want to connect it, like we want to motivate it, and we want to understand why these characters are doing what they're doing, and we want to kind of have the whole thing hang together as one story. So we need to connect the different set pieces, and it does that. And I think you can judge it on that basis, and on that basis, it's got a whole bunch of different flaws. One of them is that entire sequences of this don't need to be here. So, for example, everything to do with the aircraft carrier, for example, cut easy 20 minutes and have it not really impact the story. And there's a whole bunch of stuff like on that island where they have to crack the code. It's a little bit long, right? Like it does not have to be quite that involved. And there's other parts to it too, where you could easily cut this down to 100 minutes and you would still have the basic story intact. Another aspect where I think we can criticize it is one of the things that makes this believable is kind of that it kind of walks this tightrope between believable and not believable, right? So on the one hand, Ethan Hunt is just a guy who is like really good at what he does, and he goes and gets into these extremely absurd situations, but he's ultimately just a human, but then he does borderline superhuman things and so on. So for example, that really works in the airplane stunt, right? Where he's chasing the guy in the biplane, and he kind of has to climb into the cockpit, and he has to fight the first guy to take control of one plane, and then he gets into close combat with the other plane, and he has to defeat the villain and has to get the USB with the virus. That's all really great. What's not so great is the whole thing where he gets out of the Russian submarine, where he has retrieved the original source code of the entity, and he is in Arctic water without protection and basically dies. And there's no real story reason for why he survives that, right? He was supposed to use the suit which protects him, which he had to ditch because it wouldn't fit through the torpedo tube. And he was supposed to get this experimental treatment that was supposed to allow him to survive at extreme pressures, and he didn't get that either. So at that point, he's just a guy, and he still survives for no plot reason. It's a neat visual, right, where he basically faints and kind of the camera twists so that he kind of drifts up against the pack ice, but it looks like it's a floor because the camera's upside down, and it makes no sense. And even like, we are here for superhuman stuff, but still he's still a human being, and he's still like stuff that should kill a human. Like if he was shot like in the head and then kind of just walked away from it, we would cry foul on that, because that is not what a human does. Right? There's a limit in an action movie to what a character is supposed to survive, and the movie is supposed to create scenarios in which we walk right up to that line. And as long as it's believable, it's exciting. And the minute it becomes a cartoon, it stops being exciting. And that is why Argyle failed, is because they couldn't decide what the rules were and what the reality was. Like, they kept changing it even within scenes. And that is why that movie became a cartoon towards the end. For the most part, Mission Impossible keeps one foot on the ground, right? For the most part, it is still human beings in extraordinary circumstances. But when they do a stunt, we believe that a human being sort of can do this.
Did the action feel organic to the story? Or were there times where it just felt like they were just doing stunts for the stunts?
Especially the submarine one, it makes sense to the story, because you've got this like sunken submarine where the entity was first uploaded, and they have to retrieve it and in order to get the entity source code to essentially corrupt it. Made enough sense for me, and I was like, okay, cool. We're gonna have to go down to the bottom of the sea floor with Tom Cruise, and I was on board with that, and I was like, great. And everything about it was great up until sort of the point that Daniel mentioned, where he becomes unrealistic how he survives that. But everything leading up to that point, even when he gets off the first submarine and he sees that the second submarine that's following is literally right up behind him, and you're just like, oh, and you have to like narrowly avoid its propellers and stuff like that. Great, like it was brilliantly done. And then sort of when he gets into the submarine and then things start going wrong, and he's like applying pressure, and the submarine's about to like sink a little bit further than what it was, and making his like ascent back to the surface a lot more difficult. The whole like not being able to get back through where he came from, the like having to be careful of the missiles, having to go through the missile like tube exit or whatever, all brilliantly done. And then you just get to that moment, you're like, you just didn't stick the landing. You just like kind of like messed up that last part of the stunt. So for that element of it, it made sense. On the plane one, the only thing that was kind of like taking me out a little bit was the time limit that they had, or sort of the time constraints that they were under. After a certain point, I was like, I'm pretty sure by this point you've kind of run out of time. Even though the movie's telling me that it's all within the 15 minutes or so that they had, I was kind of looking at it like, too much has happened and enough, like a lot of time has passed between where we initially started to where we are when you eventually sort of connected the two pieces together. So, but again, like everything apart from that, it was kind of like, again, like set up well. You know, the villain talks about having, you know, two planes, a backup plane. So like when he does miss the first plane, I'm like, oh, damn, he's got away. But then I remember actually, no, he mentioned it. It's a second plane, and that's how he's gonna sort of kind of like find his way to catch up with the villain and stuff like that. It was all kind of fine, and you know, the villain's motivation to kind of like run away in that time is like, you know, he believes that the key is always going to come back to him because he has like this thing, and like, you know, because it's written for it to always come to him. And then for the most part, it's true. Like Ethan Hunt always has to go to him.
Can I get a sanity check on the airplane scene? When he fights Gabriel, right? Gabriel is about to jump out of the airplane. I forget whether Gabriel jumps or whether Ethan kind of pushes him out. Gabriel says, "I'm the only one here who has a parachute." And then he jumps out, and then he opens the parachute, right? But then Ethan also jumps out. Like, I think the plane catches fire, and then Ethan jumps out, and then he has a parachute and opens it. And then the parachute catches fire, completely burns up, and then he opens a second parachute. Am I crazy?
No,
Yeah, no, I clocked that. I clocked that.
Yeah.
Is that not a complete fake out?
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah,
I would agree. So yeah. So yeah, I feel like they stuck the landing on their two set pieces really badly, actually, because I do remember thinking that, and I was thinking, where did you get the second parachute from? I don't know. Yeah, it didn't make sense.
There could have been some convoluted way to justify it, right? Which would have been part of the fun.
I thought that he was going to jump after, Gabriel? I thought he was going to jump after Gabriel and, you know, do this whole, like, you know, when people, like, dive and they, like, try and, like, you know, synchronize dive and, like, hold on to each other, whatever, like that. I thought he was going to go and catch him and use his parachute and kill him. I thought that's what he was going to do. And then he pulled out a parachute and I was like, oh, okay, cool, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, good on you, but like, did we not just establish that you didn't have one? I don't know. Maybe I missed something. Maybe Gabriel was just wrong. But if he was just wrong, what was the point of the line? I don't know. But it felt like a little bit anticlimactic. Like if you establish, it's like a reverse Chekhov's gun kind of thing, where you establish that the challenge is that Ethan Hunt is in free fall, and his plane is on fire, and he has no parachute. How will he get out of this one? It's a total cop out to say, well, he has two parachutes. Right? Like, how is that?
Yeah.
It's tension.
Yeah. Oh, I said, Daniel, your execution when you deliver certain points is hilarious. But you're all right. Well, he has two parachutes. Sorry.
What's better than zero parachutes? Two parachutes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I was gonna say, since we're on the topic of Gabriel, how do you guys feel about his character arc? Especially because with his kind of like story, how he ended up, you know, in a way turning on the AI, it kind of felt, what would I say, it was parallel to God and Satan, but there was some similarities in, you know, the story of, how Satan ended up, how Damien ended up becoming Satan, because obviously he wants to kind of be his own God. And kind of same with Gabriel, like he kind of wanted to be his own God in a way, because you're saying how the AI is wrong and the AI technically is all knowing. So I was like, oh, okay, I kind of felt like, you know, the way that his character arc ended, it was kind of pretty cool in terms of like his transformation from being like, you know, the entity's disciple in a way to ending up wanting to be his own God in a way. So how do you guys feel about his, you know, his story and how it transformed?
It would have been great if he had a story, because he just disappears for, I think, about like 2/3 of the movie. Like I'm sure we see him at the start, and there's huge chunks in the middle where we don't see him, and then we have to go see Gabriel, and then Gabriel's back in the movie again. For me, it's like kind of like hard to say, because like I was like, I kind of forgot you were in this movie. I've even forgot that you was the antagonist in this. So I get like the pieces that you're trying to put together about him, you know, kind of like going from being a disciple to, you know, wanting to be God himself, but it's like the movie didn't give us anything to really go off of.
He's not much of a presence for me, if I'm honest. Like he's bad guy, kind of his deal.
So what characters stood out to you guys? Seriously?
None.
I don't know.
Oh, okay, well then if that's the case, sorry Daniel, I'm sorry to cut you off because I'm pretty sure you're going to say none as well, right?
So the problem is I've not, outside of Dead Reckoning, I've not seen a whole bunch of the others, so I'm not emotionally attached to, is it Luther, Grace, Benji, Paris? Like, all of these characters are just action movie characters to me, because I've not seen the others, which did mean that a lot of the callbacks and all of the nostalgia kind of fell flat to me. In various places, they have callbacks to previous Mission Impossible movies, right? And I just kind of nodded through it and said, yeah, okay, I realize what you're doing. But aside from the first one, I don't really have any attachment to older Mission Impossible movies. And I kind of just sat through it. And so when one of them died or came close or whatever, I kind of said, okay, I guess we're doing that. To me, like, maybe this is different if you've been watching all of these over the last 25 years and you really care about these characters and you really know them. I just don't. And the movie like did not really take the time to really make me care about them, because that had happened in previous movies. That is not the same as saying it's bad, right? Like, I think they have enough of a personality. Like, I've seen action movies where the characters have less personality. It's just not about that, right? Like, they are all kind of there to kind of support the plot and to support Ethan. And that's kind of what this is about. And there's not very much where I would say, yo, I'm really invested in this. I really feel for this person.
Okay. Well, what I'm about to say, I'm not trying to push a narrative that this movie is bad or anything. I'm just trying to understand something. Because I think we all agree that this film is known for its actions and moments, etc., right? It's not really necessarily known for the story. This is why I feel like you guys are being hypocrites. It's because I don't remember what review it was, but I think it was you, Daniel, that said, and however you agreed. You said just because you said something one doesn't have to be in exchange for the other. Because I think I made a point saying that like everything else was good, and then you guys were saying, yeah, but the story is terrible, and why? Like, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, just because one is good, it doesn't mean you don't need to have a good story. You should have a good story as well as the other aspects of the film, which are good as well. So how come, if you both agree with that, this film you're making you're making an excuse, not even an excuse, you're just showing it grace because you're saying it's good at what it does, which is the whole theatrics of it all.
So first of all, what you described sounds like something I would say. So I completely resemble that remark. I think it comes down to the promise of the movie. Like, what is the attraction? And I do think with more detailed world building and more character work, I think this could have been a better story where we care more about these people when they are in danger. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter in this case. I'm saying the attraction here is the stunts and the big spectacle, and it delivers on that. And that's to the movie's credit. And I don't think there's a contradiction there. If a movie wants me to care about its characters and then the characters are terrible, then that's bad. If a movie wants to deliver me great action and the action is mediocre, that's terrible, right? Like, it really comes down to what the movie promises. And I think it really is very good at delivering that spectacle. I think part of it is that my big reference point is Dead Reckoning, where the balance was completely off. Like, the spectacle to nonsense exposition ratio was way off. And here it was not perfect, but it was better, I would say. And also, one thing that was really obvious to me as I was watching it is there's no real tension in this movie, because almost all of the danger is in like the big stunts, right? Like, where especially Ethan is in some big dangerous situation that he has to make it through, but we know he will make it through because there's no way he's going to drown in that submarine. He's going to fall off that plane. There's zero doubt about what the outcome is going to be, and it's the movie's job to make me forget that. And it made me forget that in most places. The submarine scene where he has to dive down to the submarine while he's being pursued by the Russian submarine, get on board, find the source code, and then get out. And he almost drowns and all of that, right? And the whole thing is shifting, and so we have this practical set that is rotating during the scene, and it's filling up with water, and there's red lights everywhere, and like one thing goes wrong after the next, right? He has a plan for getting out, and each piece of his equipment kind of fails, and he has to improvise. There is no scenario in which he doesn't make it out with the source code, right? So no stakes, no tension. Like, it's all fake, and I still liked it because it's just done well. Like, make it not suck is kind of rule zero of stuff like this, right? Like, figure out what you want to do and then do it well, and make me forget that it's an illusion. That's kind of your job as a movie. And this movie did it, and for that reason, I don't hate it. I still think there would have been ways to make it better if the non-action parts had been a little bit better. But even that was not terrible. Like, honestly, like when the general realizes what situation he's in and he borrows the guard's sidearm to shoot himself, and that is why he has the gun when an assassin tries to kill the president, and he can shoot them, but he takes a bullet. Like, I cared about that. I cared about that guy. Don't ask me his name because I don't know. But you know what sequence I mean?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's like, that is enough in terms of making me care about a character because I had a clear idea of what the situation was and what his deal was and what his outlook on that was. Like, it was like there was enough dialogue and there was enough mannerisms to explain to me what place this character is in. And then when he asks the guard for his sidearm, we know what's going on. We know he's going to shoot himself at the first chance he gets. So it's like a small thing, right? It takes up like 5 minutes of the movie, like scattered throughout maybe 3 scenes. But I liked it. It did what it was supposed to do and it made me care. If a movie does that a few times, I'm kind of on board with it. Now, the other stuff also has to work, like the stunts also work, for example, right? And the characters are what they're supposed to be and all of that, right? And so for that reason, I'm not mad at the movie.
Pretty much what Daniel said. Yeah. And again, this isn't saying that, like, we're not saying that in this movie that it's perfect writing or the perfect characters. I think we're like
It's
all in
not.
agreement that they're all pretty mediocre and they're all sort of pretty much sort of, you don't really care about any of them. And funny enough, actually, kind of Daniel mentioned something of that person. The person I cared about the most was the president in this, because you're in this like impossible situation where you're the last nation on Earth that has sort of still control over their nukes. And what do you do in that situation? Because at this point now, you have the power to take so many lives. And then you also have on top of that, the sort of added pressure of, we also maybe have to pick some of our people that have to die as well in this scenario, and you're kind of like stuck in this impossible situation. And sort of kind of what do you do? And then in the last moment when they're about to do it, like her humanity kicks in, and she's just like she's had to act strong. She's had to be sort of very decisive, very strong, and very like stern with everyone around her up until that point. But in the final moment, she just can't do it, and it's just like stuff like that's really good. And it would have been great if there was more of that in all of the other characters, but unfortunately there isn't. But there's kind of like little gems like that, whilst everything else kind of being service. I always say, like, if you're going to do a movie like this, just make it serviceable enough, like the story, make it like make sense, make it like make the plot make sense, make everything serviceable enough so that the main thing that you want to do, whether it's like stunts, whether it's action, whether it's whatever, like even John Wick doesn't always have like the greatest story, but John Wick does action better than most. And so, like, Keanu Reeves is like brilliant as John Wick in those movies. And that's why I'm like really mixing them, because like there's ones I like and there's ones I don't like in the John Wick series. There was one thing I kind of wanted to touch on in this movie as well, and I was trying to like kind of piece together. Like I kind of forgot to think about it after the movie. I was trying to piece together what it was trying to say in it. So do you remember at the start of the movie where you have, I'm going to call it Mantis because I forget her name. You have Mantis and you have like the black
Paris,
guy, and they're
the French one. It's called Paris.
Paris, yeah. I mean, that's easy enough. But they're in a bit of a standoff, essentially.
Before you go into that, I was sitting next to a French guy in the theater. He thought the French lines in this were hysterical. He was laughing every time they spoke French. And I speak enough French to know that those lines were not written by a fluent French speaker. Yeah. And the guy was just like having the time of his life laughing at this movie. And then he was explaining to his girlfriend, who apparently was not French, why this was funny. And that made it funnier. That's kind of my experience. Go ahead.
So what I was saying, there was like that standoff moment between the two of them, and Ethan's in the middle, and he's saying like, "No, you put your gun down," and then like there's like this kind of like stalemate of like, no, he has to do it first, or you have to do it first, and whatever. And then that then kind of later called back onto in the whole present scene where it's like they're in this like stalemate of like, you know, what do you do? Like, do you let your nukes go first, or do you wait until you're nuked and whatever? And it's like this whole like, again, like stalemate of who puts their like arsenal down first, or who puts like the guns down first. And eventually, like, you know, again, the president kind of makes the human decision once she's the only one with the nukes. But like the whole tension around that is like, you know, there's a few big nations still left with their nukes, and it's like, who's going to blink first, or like what are people going to do? And I was like trying to like, I don't know, think about what the movie was trying to say about that. There's also like another theme that they were kind of like touching on about like, and we can touch on that as well, but about like the decisions that we make in life and like the impact on others and whether it's like good or bad and like how it can be perceived and whatever like that. But just that whole thing. I don't know. It seemed like it was like intentional, especially with like the Paris and that guy. It seemed like it was like intentional for like that, and it kind of like lingered on that, and like that scene was like, again, probably one of the scenes that was like a little bit longer than it needed to be. But I don't know. Was there something in that? Is there something I'm like missing? Is there like a message in there, or I don't know, or is it just they just kind of had like a neat idea and they just did it? I don't know.
Can't say I picked up on that. Sorry.
Fair. It was just something that I'd noticed, and I was like, what are they trying to do? Because again, it's a story that isn't really rich in sort of in details on like plot or like themes or like character, etc. But it was just like two things that like I prominently remember happening in the movie. I don't know. Maybe it was just like a whole point of like I really don't know. I really don't know. But the second one where I feel like there was like maybe a little bit more there was the whole how they were kind of characterizing Ethan's decision about like how every time he went rogue, something bad also happened from it. So like they tied it back to one of the earlier movies where he stole the rabbit foot. And at the time, he thought it was like this poisonous gas or whatever. But what he didn't actually really know was it was the entity itself, and like it then manifested itself later on in many movies later, to a point where there was this like kind of like global extinction event that was possibly due to happen. But then he was also reminded by the people around him about like the good that he's done, and I feel like especially the moment at the very end when they're all kind of like gathered around in London, and you're kind of like looking around and taken in the crowd. It's like the decisions he made has like saved so many lives, and it's like the whole emphasis on the actions that you do have effect on people that you may never know, or like people may never even know you like things that you've done, but what you've done has impacted them. And I thought that was like interesting and quite profound in terms of like trying to understand your own actions and trying to like sort of kind of characterize your impact in the world, and like how you may like have influence over like things that you like may never even know. And it was just like kind of interesting, the back and forth, and like how you can like interpret like one action to sort of like mean to have like two different kind of like impacts. If you kind of get what I'm saying. Again, like I'm doing a little bit of reaching with this, but it was just something that was in the movie that I thought, again, there wasn't much to kind of go off, but it was just like something that was interesting to kind of stew on and think about how your actions have ripple effects across across people that you do know and across people that you don't know.
Yeah, the thing about the bioweapon, I've not seen that movie. From context, it looks a lot like a retcon. Doesn't that undermine this idea of like consequences of your actions and owning the consequences of your actions?
In that sense, it was more how he made the selfish decision. Maybe he didn't do it for the right reason. How he like intentionally stole something that he knew was dangerous, whether he knew what was in it or not, whether they retconned it or not. It was something that was dangerous, and it was something that he did for a villain because he was trying to save someone that he cared about and he loved, essentially. And it was then, okay, like look at the consequences of your actions from there.
Okay.
And kind of maybe like speaking to his selfishness, essentially.
Is he selfish? Does he not risk his life in every movie for other people?
Yeah, and again, this is where like again the movie isn't going to be like so super heavy on like handling its themes well and handling that aspect of it super well. But I felt like that was just like some type of conflict that they tried to introduce into his character, and some type of like doubt as to what like whether what he was doing was the right thing, and whether what he was doing understanding the impact of like what he was doing.
Well, guys, last thoughts. Even though it sounded like I was against this film, I really wasn't. Like I said, my beginning statement was I had a good time of the fact that the story wasn't too compelling. However, the theatrics of it all and the action, what it's known for is what made it a good time. And it had like memorable scenes, especially the submarine scene was definitely one of my favorites. So for a person like me, I can excuse a film not having a good story if there's other things that I like about it. However, I do know with films overall, a good story is like the main thing that you need to have for movies. So that's why I was a bit there was like internal conflict in me when we were talking about this, because I know how you two are, especially when it comes to stuff like that. However, now after you both explained your reasoning for why you've kind of like given this film grace, so okay, that makes sense, and I do understand. So yeah, because I was like, when we were speaking, I was thinking, wait, hold on, you guys sound like me when it comes to this film, because I'm someone that can kind of like, excuse a film for having a bad story if there's other things that I like. Do you know what I'm saying? Whereas I know you guys are more strict when it comes to stuff like that, and you don't go for that. So I was like, okay, that's why that was where my confusion lied. But yeah, you explained it, so it was all good. But yeah, so for me, wasn't really a good story. The story was mid. However, I think the experience that I got when it comes to, like I said, the action, just the fun of it, it was fun at times. I don't have much to say besides giving this film a 5.5 out of 10.
I feel like the movie's too long for its own good. It's one, like, the spectacles is like good to see on the big screen. We touched on like the underwater scene and everything up until the point where he sort of miraculously survives an impossible situation is near perfect, and it's great, and it's like got good tension and everything inside of it. It's just like everything around it is of course going to be fluff, but it's too much fluff, and they could have just like trimmed it by so much. So if you have a spare 3 hours to invest in going to watch this in the cinema, then yeah, for sure, give it a go. But if you feel like, movies are too long and long movies aren't really your thing, then you might, I wouldn't say you'll struggle through it, because once you get to like the good parts, like you're really invested in the movie. It's just in between, you're kind of like twiddling your thumbs a little bit, waiting for it to get back to, what it does best. In that sense, it's difficult. This is a difficult score to give. I'll be so honest, man. This is a difficult one to give because like the highs are really high, but it's just too goddamn long, man. So I'm gonna give it 6.5 out of 10. I feel like it's low. I feel like it's a low score because I actually really enjoyed the good parts of the movie. I'm gonna bump it to 7. I give it a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, so I think this movie's flaws are very numerous and obvious. It's too long, the characters are a bit flat, there are entire sequences that are redundant, and I'm not in the habit of making excuses for movies. The question is, did I have a good time, and did I buy what the movie was selling? And what the movie was selling in this case were the action set pieces and the stunts, and a serviceable plot that enabled those. And for the most part, it did. I did not hate my viewing experience. And so for that reason, my rating is not mad about it out of 5.
I feel like this film would have been really good to watch in 4DX, which I was so mad about because I wanted to watch it in 4DX.
Maybe.
Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. I feel like we were all in agreement most of the conversation. But yeah. All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in today.
If you reached this part of the episode, thank you very much for working with us for this entire episode. Of course, if you liked everything that you heard today, tell a friend, and maybe even hit the like button. Who knows? But if you hated everything and you just couldn't stand our conversation, then you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys. You heard it here first. We will see you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.